Tonight on the line, why should we believe in God? With your host, Shannon Q, and featured guest, Paulogia. This is The Line.
Woohoo! Pardon me. Dance party! Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Line. I am Shannon Q. Thank you for joining us. We've already got callers waiting in the queue. I'm pumped about it. Before we get going, I just want to take care of a few little housekeeping items. If you are watching us on Jimmy Snow's channel or you are watching on the Shannon Q channel, go subscribe to The Line. The Line has its own channel. I am not always the host. It is not always on my channel. It is not always going to be on Jimmy's channel, but it will always be on The Line. So if you like what you're seeing and you want to see more of it, go subscribe to The Line and you will see every episode. Make sure you click that bell. Today, my fantastic co-host is joining me again. This is back to back for us, I think, Guy.
For us, I think the audience got to have a break from us, but we don't.
For us, it's back to back. But yes, the audience did get to have like a brief, minor break from our foolishness. But yeah, tell everybody who you are and where they can find you, just in case anybody is foolish enough to be unfamiliar with the great and powerful Paulogia.
My name is Paul. I have a YouTube channel called Paulogia. I am a former Christian, and I usually, in my online life, I'm looking at the claims of Christians. So I'm hoping that there's theists of all stripes that we can chat with today, or atheists with some new fun questions to ask.
Awesome. Well, we can jump right into it today because we've already got people waiting, which is exciting. So the line number is probably being posted in the chat. You can also see it at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If you would like to give us a call, please do. We still do have a couple of lines open, but they fill up quickly. So if you want to get in now is probably a good time to give a call. Another good time to call is right after we let a caller go, because that will open up another line if they are already full. So that's the number. If you want to call, please give us a call. We're excited to talk to you. Come tell us why we should believe in God, guys. We want to know. We're waiting. We've been waiting. All right. Our first caller is a theist, and I can't see their name, but I'm going to pull them in. Oh, I think it's Min, actually.
It's Min.
Yeah, I think it is Min. Hi, Min. Welcome to The Line.
Hello, Shannon.
How are you doing?
Hello, Paul.
Hello.
What would you like to talk about today, my friend?
How about you?
Good. Very good.
Yeah, so today before so when I see the notification for the show, I just happened to watch a clip about Carl Jung and Nietzsche on religion.
Okay.
So then I decided to call you and probably to discuss with you about the reason to believe in God. And I want to make it clear to you that when we talk about God, from my perspective, I'm not talking about like the deity in the Abrahamic tradition, but more like the broader sense of like the transcendence feelings or something like beyond ourselves, like a higher cause.
Okay.
So can you still hear me?
Yeah, no, I can still hear you. I'm a little bit caught up on your definition of what God is. You just said it's, transcendent feelings and something higher than ourselves. Did I hear you right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. What do you mean by something higher than ourselves? I
mean, like it's something like I think like probably the ideals, like or like the grand vision that we can see beyond our individual existence. Did that make sense?
See beyond our individual existence. So it doesn't make a great deal of sense to me, man. When you say see beyond our individual existence, you mean like whatever is us, whatever constitutes an us, continues to exist even when our bodies cease to exist?
No, it's more like, there's something like just I guess like a higher cause or higher purpose that beyond the materialistic notion of our existence.
And how would we identify that and recognize it?
That's the thing that I'm not sure yet, because from my understanding, as I watch, the video about Jung's view on religion, and I feel like this is something can only be resolved in the arena of mythology, but not in the way that I am able to quantify in reality that this is the higher cause or the higher purpose. And if you don't mind, I would love to read you what I watch from the videos, and hopefully you and Paul can share your opinions with me about the reason we should believe in God. Yeah. So from what I gather, the narrative said that the scientific method only deal with the cause and effect, and it helps us understanding how the natural world works. But when we talk about religious myths, they are narratives that transmit the modes of behavior, pattern of action, and ways of experiencing the world that promotes healthy psychological development and meaningful life. And in other words, some myths embodies wisdom from generations, and it gives us the solution to our existential dilemma and help people unite under a shared vision in a culture. So under that, I think when people believe in God, it's sort of like, it gives them what the quote said is, give out the solution to, the reason why they are here and what is the cause of their existence. So I think like on the pragmatic sense, I think is maybe necessary to believe in God. So what do you think, Shannon?
Oh, okay. Well, Paul, do you want to go first, Paul? I have like a billion things that I think. So I heard a couple.
Jordan Peterson, yeah. That's what I was wondering, but
no, it does sound a little bit like Jordan Peterson. So essentially, what I'm hearing you say, if I'm understanding correctly, is that a belief in God doesn't necessarily need to constitute an actual belief in a. It seems to me, actually, I think this is probably a better way of parsing it, that you're conflating a belief in God with a belief in a religion, because, and there are some religions that don't actually require a God. Like if you look at the Durkheimian model of religion, for example, it's a set of, I'm going to butcher it because I haven't looked at it in a while, but it's, a set of cultural practices and principles surrounded or cultivated around a group of sacred objects, things, or practices, is I think like a Cole's Notes version. So Durkheim actually very purposefully left God out of his definition of religion in order to be able to culturally quantify for sociological purposes in order to do studies, right? So what I'm hearing you say is religion is a necessity because it's a way of passing on values and solving existential crises for people.
Right.
Does that sound about right? So now I don't understand.
It also helps, unite the culture too, Shannon.
Yeah. Okay. So, and it unifies people together. It cultivates communities, and it permeates cultures, and it's effective at doing that. So, if your argument is that it's effective at permeating cultures and transmitting values, it's a quick fix for solving existential crises because it has a built-in answer for an existential crisis. Generally, most religions do, because they say, this is your purpose because God, or because deity, or because this energy, or whatever. That it's not a palpable solution for somebody like me. So for you to say it's necessary is difficult for me to reconcile, because I no longer have an existential crisis because I've reconciled that my meaning and purpose exist with me in the finite form that I exist in. And I also recognize that though they're excellent means through which to transmit cultural practices and morals and cohere societies, they are not always a beneficial way to do that. And because religions tend to have a strict set of guidelines and mandates through which they're founded, they're not as easily malleable. And as a result, they can cause damage to people because of their immutability. Just it's built in. There's a built-in immutability that forces you to not deviate from the practice, even if it is something that's beneficial to you individually or potentially beneficial to a society, because it's permeated the society. So I went all over the place there a little bit because I think that there was a lot to cover, but does some of that make sense?
Yes, Shannon, I think so. And, I would love to hear Paul's opinion too, but
is Paul here?
I would love to...
Well, I mean...
I didn't hear him say that.
For me, I mean, my thoughts are always... I don't really care much about the utility of religion until someone can demonstrate to me the truth value of the religion, because I've yet to see any value that comes from a religion that is uniquely based in that religion. So, for example, if we want to say, let's all rally around patriotism or love or positivity or let's beat COVID or whatever that, whatever we can rally people around, or defend our homes against an invader. Like, those are all things that can sometimes come from religion, but they also don't need to. There are secular value examples of all of those things. And I was also in a bit of a studied, Joseph Campbell, the hero's myth, when I, in my former career. And a lot of those things are just built around the kind of stories that humans like to hear, and that those same common mythical tropes, manage to rally people together. Well, okay, that's utility, but that does nothing to demonstrate truth value. So that's sort of where I'm at. I'm like, well, you can define God in some sense just to say that patriotism is God, or just anytime we feel a sense of togetherness, that's God, but that doesn't mean much to me.
Yeah, and if it's not predicated on a truth, even if it continues to have differing iterations surrounding those cultural practices as culture itself changes and our understanding of things like morality and how to exist together and what isn't acceptable as an individual, as those change through time, the very fact that the religious practices themselves need to be able to be malleable to whatever degree is acceptable, is sort of evidence to me that they themselves aren't particularly necessary because they have to roll with the times. But there's a wall that you hit when you're looking at religions, where you have to absorb that malleability into the existing paradigm of that religion, and otherwise the religion itself becomes an unnecessary part of the practice of that malleability. And at that point, why do you even need a religion at all? So to whatever degree it is malleable, once you hit that wall, you've hit a constraint. And if the religion itself is the constraint, you have to ask, was it necessary to begin with? And why are we looking at religions as a necessity? If what their primary reason for existing is, and what their benefit is the ability to unify people and transmit moral information, and the only reason that we're not kind of shirking them off is because we see that as something that has utility, why wouldn't we all kind of work together to figure out how to exist societally, culturally, and socially together without the constraints of the individual religions stopping us because it's undeniable, I think, that the fact that there are so many differing religions and the fact that each of them individually has a constraint that prevents the infinite progress of that malleability, it becomes a hindrance. So you can argue that religion, like as a ubiquitous concept, is somehow a necessity potentially, because it has this efficacy of transmitting moral information and unifying people. But then which one? Like, do you pick one? Because if one group has one that's helping to unify them and transmit the moral information, another group has another that's helping to unify them, transmit moral information, and there's some sort of deviation between the belief sets of what is or isn't moral, for example, between those two groups, and they either cohabit or border on each other, or they're attempting to kind of mingle in with one another, then we hit consistent conflict. And the conflict, I think, sometimes can be rooted in the fact that there are differing belief practices grounded in religious artifice that people aren't willing to cast aside because they see it as their morality, rather than seeing that there is a human morality that we should all work on together. So once you take into account the fact that there's a multitude of religions, and within each religion there's a multitude of sects, it becomes a hindrance and not a help for this sort of information transmission.
So Shannon, I guess I think I agree with you for the most part. However, I do think that if religion is like a medium to preserve the myth, that Carl Jung proposed in his thesis, then even without religion, then I guess we can instill down to believe in God. And I would got in a quotation here is that, I think maybe the belief in God is, I think in a way, like necessary to preserve the myth, that's necessary to, to help us deal with our psyche. Because the next statement that I heard from Nietzsche and Jung is that just because in our modern day that people lost the myth, like the ancient Greeks and the myth from the Norse tradition, that doesn't mean that they no longer have the loss for meaning. But however, without the myth to author the meaning to your life story and to unite a culture in which we are living in, then according to what they say, then people will latch on to a collectivist political ideology, and a lot of time those ideology can be more even more harmful than religion. Like, I mean, than the belief in God itself. So I think, like, even if religion,
so now
is
I'm
God,
hearing you say that God, we should propose religion as a way of behavioral control, because the alternative to people to not getting people convinced that they should comport to religious ideologies is that they may choose an alternative ideology that we don't like. So it's better that they have a religious ideology, because the alternative could be they have an ideology that we don't like. And the answer to that question to me isn't we get them to believe a religious ideology because we fear that they may have a collectivist ideology, which is just an assertion, I think, really just a bald assertion. It's to look at better ways to have cohesiveness in societies that doesn't require religion. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be religious. Like, I'd be the first one on the front lines if somebody was attempting to tell you that you couldn't practice your religion so long as it wasn't harming anybody, right? But that's not to say that we shouldn't, as a society, look at alternatives to religion in the way of moral frameworks and cohesiveness and cooperation, because we cannot, like, this consistent proposal that we need to have a reliance on religion, I think, is incredibly short-sighted. And that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing we need a reliance on religion, because otherwise, how can we control the people?
Yeah, Shannon, I don't understand Jung to the depth that you do, but my understanding from what he said, it seemed like he doesn't care too much about, the organized institutional like religion, but it's more like the belief in the mythology itself is something that, necessary to to resolve the psychological question about your existential crisis, or help you find a pattern of your action that you should pursue, like like what you said before, like the archetype is there for people to imbue a meaning on, right? So they can find a way to behave appropriately in the world, right? So
You
then
can derive
I guess like from
you can derive
yeah.
meaningful experiences and understandings from reading. Like this is two-tiered. I think we should absolutely preserve history. Like when you say preservation of mythology, I think we should absolutely preserve history. But that doesn't, to me, comport with we should also encourage people to believe mythologies. Now, exposing people to previous mythologies and giving them an explanation of how those mythologies were utilized and, maybe what Jung's view of them was, how they were utilized, what they were utilized for, what people derived in the way of meaning from them, understanding why people derived that type of meaning. Those types of things I think are valuable, but just blanket saying that, we need religion because people derived meaning from these mythologies and it was effective. That's where you lose me, because just because something was an effective way to answer a question for somebody or control a group of people doesn't mean to the satisfaction of them cooperating, I guess, as a whole cohesive group, which I think you could analyze further. That's not enough for me to say, oh, okay, well, we should continue to employ that, because I also think that it's short-sighted, because we're essentially saying we have this effective tool, but we don't need to build a better tool or look at better tools, because this one's sufficient to a certain degree despite its flaws. So why don't we just continue to propagate that, because we've demonstrated that it has some degree of efficacy despite all of these flaws. So we need it because we don't have an alternative. To me, that's like saying, don't bother exploring the alternatives. And propagating that is cutting the progression of society off at the knees, I think, personally. Like, we should look at ways that don't require religion to form cohesive groups of cooperative humans so that we can better society, a society that exists both with and without religion, but doesn't have religion as a necessity, a requirement, or a mandate.
And we've been chatting about this for a while, but I would just throw in there that if society wants and needs common myths, I mean, there's a reason why things like Star Wars and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, like, we get these new, and the Marvel universe, like, there's all these new modern myths that are equally they study them now, and they're filling the same holes that the old mythologies used to fill, to give some common stories so that we can all talk about Thanos snap and people know what you mean. So you get, we get some of that, but we don't need to believe that those things are true in order to have common stories. Like, so again, there's a secular way to come about this that doesn't require having people believe in things that aren't evidentially, justified.
Yeah. I'll let you have the last word, and then we do have to move on to the next caller, though you and I could probably just talk for 3 hours straight.
Yeah. Thank you, Shannon and Paul. You are so, gracious to discuss it with me, because, I always now, because the conversation we have, I'm become more interested in, psychology, especially about, because, my background in Buddhism, so I tend to interested in the religious, the psychological aspect of religion, and, it's something like we can talk like for hours if necessary. But so the last thing I want to ask you is like, then do you think that without, I mean, the religion can be gone, and even it's like nowadays we invent even more myths, like like Paul said, the Harry Potter is another myth that help people to find the way in their life, the meaning in their life. So it's like the myth can never go, right? The ancient myths go away, but the modern myth will be created, because somehow the people, I guess, need it for the archetype or example that the myth imbue on the the meaning of our lives, so we can live up to the ideals of the characters in the narratives, so that our
Yeah, I
life
think
can
we
have more,
fictional stories for a cathartic
pattern
relation.
and less chaos, right?
Yeah, I think it's a form of cathartic relation too. So when we have fictional stories that we can see ourselves in the characters, or we can see scenarios that elicit emotions in us, that's a good cathartic practice to a certain degree, and it's something that unifies people as culture too. Like stories being told is something for ages that has been an integral part of societal cohesion, but that happens irrespective of religions existing. And I'll let Paul say the last thing, and then we do have to let you come in.
No, I
Thank you
nothing
so
else
much.
to add. I mean, I would, if you add to your list Joseph Campbell, if this is an area of study that you're following.
Cool. All right, man. Thank you all, as always, Min. Have a good evening.
Yeah. Thank you,
Bye.
you too. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Shannon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yep.
All right. So the next caller, oh gosh, I hope I pronounced this correctly, is Zizia. And Zizia is a theist and isn't sure how to stop believing in God. Welcome to the line. Please tell me I didn't butcher your name too badly.
Actually, they spelled my name wrong.
Oh, I'm so sorry. May I ask what your name is?
It's V-E-E, V as in like violin, A-H.
Oh, Ziva?
Ziva.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we fixed it. Thank you. Thank you for calling the line. What can we talk to you about today?
What'd you say?
So I said, thank you for calling the line. What can we talk with you about today?
Oh. My family is Jewish. We're modern Orthodox. By the way, I just have to say, I've been thinking about calling this line for a very long time. And my friend was like, no, you have to go on tonight because Shannon is one of the hosts, and Shannon's like the nicest person ever. So, yeah.
It's true.
That's what I thought.
Aww.
And if Ziva, if we could have you speak up a little bit.
Yeah, you're a little quiet.
I think we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Sorry. Is this any better?
Oh, much better.
Much better. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Got it. Sorry. Also, I do have to say that, Paul, I really did love your video about if God is real, why would he stay hidden? I really loved that video.
The Divine Hiddenness video, yeah.
But my problem is I don't want to believe, and I can't not. It's like I know consciously that like there isn't a God, but then I have depression, and when I get really depressed, I'll like start thinking about God and everything, and I don't know how much you guys know about Judaism. We have Sabbath from Friday night through Saturday night, and it's a tradition that the parent will bless their child, and like during Sabbath, to have them be great, like the forefathers and foremothers. I don't know if that's the word. And I really, I love that feeling when my dad is giving me that blessing. But at the same time, like, I know based on, learning more that there is no God. I don't know if am I making any sense?
You are absolutely making sense to me. You're making sense to me, and you're probably making a lot of sense to Paul as somebody who's recently deconverted. Absolutely. So, Paul, do you hear anything there that you can relate to a little bit when it comes to like traditional vestiges and emotional attachments to them and familial relations and tradition?
I certainly can relate to the desire for wishing that it was true much longer than I held to the belief that it was true. So I definitely can relate to that. Do you? I guess I'm wondering, what is this a? Is this more of a wish or a sense of loss, that you've lost something when you're feeling these feelings, or when you're feeling these feelings, do you? Is your mind changed? Are you actually convinced that there is a God, or is it this a cultural loss, do you think?
I mean, I'll use the example of my dad giving me blessings on Sabbath. I think, he's literally done this since I was a baby, and a lot of things about Judaism, we have, Passover we celebrate in a way that is so meaningful, and we have these amazing conversations about humanity and who we are. And then when it gets to the spiritual part of me is like, this is really nice. But, it could just be, nostalgia, because I've been doing this since I was born.
Do you have a fear that...
I don't know if I'm making any sense.
You're absolutely making sense. So I want to reinforce something for you, that you no longer believing in a God or ascribing to your religion does not mean that you need to give up your meaningful cultural practices, and especially those that pertain to familial bonds. Now, your dad can still, if that's something that's a meaningful practice for you and your dad, and it means something to you, and there's an emotional attachment to it that's valuable to you, you continuing to do it with him, it doesn't make you any less a person who doesn't believe in God, and it doesn't make you any less a part of your family that you don't believe in God while you engage in it. The same with going through the Sabbath. So what I'm hearing is like these are family practices that are something that you may have some fear of missing out on, or not being a part of anymore, or not being as meaningful a part of as everybody else is, and that's something that you would mourn, and that's a justifiable way to feel. And it sounds like you've got a great family. It sounds like you have a really good family, Ziva. That's awesome. And it sounds like you have meaningful conversations with one another. And I don't think that that's something that needs to stop. You don't need to stop participating in these cultural practices with your family. I still do Christmas. I still do Christmas. Of course I do. Of course I do. Are you kidding me? Of course. But I'm an atheist, right?
You know what? We get 8 nights of presents.
Right. Exactly. You don't need to stop having Hanukkah. You don't need to stop engaging with the cultural practices that your family values and enjoys, simply because you don't believe the same things anymore. You believing differently doesn't make you any less a part of that family, and that doesn't mean that you're not any more or less continuing to be a part of the culture that you grew up in. Now, I understand that it might be uncomfortable when you get to the point where people are talking about spirituality, because if you are contributing, it may feel like you're contributing falsely. And that's something that you need to have a broader conversation with your family about. And I don't know if you are currently in some sort of counseling or therapeutic practice, especially if you have some depression issues. But familial counseling would be something that I would recommend, to have a real, honest, open dialogue with them about what you feel and what you think and why you feel that way, and what is and isn't important to you in the way of continuation with family practices, and what you want your involvements to still be, and things of that nature. Did some of that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. One of the big things that, makes me want to be like, well, yeah, maybe I'm wrong, is because a huge part of, Judaism is, we're all about, community. We come together to do stuff. We have so many family events for holidays. And I kind of play the, I love this holiday. It's really nice to pray to God that we don't die this year. It's great. Yeah, I love it too, cousin. But
so Ziva, I don't know if you
laugh, but we really do have these conversations. I mean,
Do you know anything about the Mennonite culture?
I'm sorry?
Do you know anything about the Mennonite culture? Have you heard of that before?
I don't.
So, or the Amish, perhaps?
I know the Amish, yeah.
Okay, so Mennonites are closely related to Amish, and that's
They're
my
Amish
background.
people with cell phones.
Yeah. So, I still today call myself a Mennonite because Mennonite is both a culture and a religion. I don't know if if I tip my head, you can't see it. I still have a crokinole board behind me, which is part of our culture stuff. I still go to all of the family things. My family has since learned that I don't believe the spiritual stuff, but they have continued to accept me to partake in the rituals.
That's amazing.
And I still do because
Nice.
they mean a lot to me. And the other thing that has happened is that I have other relatives who now secretly talk to me behind the scenes, and a lot more of the family doesn't believe than do, but they're all participating.
Oh, you're the negative influence on the family.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're a negative influence, or it's just that
I meant
I'm
that
the
as a
one
joke.
that took...
That was a joke.
Yeah,
that was a joke. I'm sorry.
Some of them don't mean it as a joke.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. That was a joke. I'm sorry.
You're okay.
No,
You're okay. You're okay.
I took it as a joke. I'm just suggesting that perhaps you're not alone in your family. It's entirely possible that that you're not alone. And when I lived in California, I knew a lot of secular Jews in our like my son's closest friends were Jewish and yet not religious, but they still partook in the major festivals, even though they didn't believe in a God and they didn't do Sabbath, every week, but they would still do the major holidays. And I mean, it is a culture. I'm not going to. And so keep the parts that are meaningful to you. Don't try and feel guilty that you don't believe all of it, because probably not everyone at the table believes all of it. They probably don't all think that Elijah is coming and that empty table place setting, is going to be filled.
It's hard
right?
to. Yeah. Sorry, I kept cutting you off. I'm really sorry about that.
No. I'm just. When you're doing this, just imagine that perhaps you're not alone.
It's tough because I have depression, and so sometimes I kind of wonder, like, I mean, you have not good thoughts when you're depressed, for me at least, and sometimes it is like looking at, we're very Jewish. Like, I went to Jewish school since infancy. So I have, like, Jewish books that are in my room that I got that have, like, all the texts. And, like, sometimes, like, kind of looking at that gives me, like, I don't know what the word is. It's like a warm feeling. I don't.
And there's probably some pride,
some right?
Cultural pride. Yeah. If we tie that back to our last caller, I mean, it is also possible to think of these things as your culture's shared mythology, your shared history that does help define who you are. And so don't shun it necessarily just because you don't accept it as true in every sense. These are still the same stories that were told by your people 4,000 years ago. So you don't have to let that go.
But what if I don't believe that the stories are true? Because I mean, it seems kind of stupid that it took them 40 years to get from Egypt to Israel.
Well, that's, I guess, what I'm saying is, if you treat them more as these were the stories that they told around their campfire, and you're getting the same stories around the same campfire, and it's in the sharing that is more important than the truth value of it.
So what do you suggest that I
don't know if that helps.
When, like, I know I keep calling back to it, and I'm very sorry. You know, when I start to think not good thoughts, and then it's like, is the thought of a God comforting me? Like, I don't, I'm not making any sense. I'm so sorry.
No, you are making sense, honey. You are making sense. Don't be sorry. You absolutely do not have to be sorry. You don't have to be sorry at all. I appreciate that you calling and sharing and being open. And then sometimes thoughts are disorganized, especially emotional thoughts. And something like breaking faith is a very emotional experience, because sometimes faith can be a sanctuary for us when we feel like there's nowhere else to go. Sometimes it can be a sanctuary, and sometimes it can be an effective one. And when you come to the realization that the faith that you once saw as a sanctuary may not be something that you can continue to hold on to because of the things that you've learned and that you now know, that can cause
absolutely
that can cause some serious anxiety when it's tied in with family practices, and you have additional anxiety that being open and honest about how you feel may distance you from the one tether you have that you need support for these issues. Then that's an additional level of anxiety. You can feel incredibly isolated. And then when you felt isolated in the past, the place that you would turn for your sanctuary sounds like it would be God. And now it's almost like that crutch is being taken from you. So the artifice and vestige of that crutch is something that you still turn to, but it's potentially not as fulfilling, but you can't quite give up that habit of looking there for safety. Does that sound right?
Wow, you explained that so much better than I did.
So that sounds like it kind of maps onto what you're feeling, Ziva?
Absolutely. Wow, you are very good at understanding my nonsense.
It's not nonsense. You did a good job of communicating it. That's why I understand. I know sometimes it feels disorganized in your head, but it came out in a way that I was able to understand. So you did a good job telling me. So thank you. So what I would say to you... Oh, go ahead, honey. Go ahead.
I was going to ask because, knowing a bit about, Paul's background, obviously, you're not Jewish, but, did it take you a long time to fully shake off everything?
Yes.
Once...
That was what I wanted to follow up with, was like, don't rush yourself. For me, the process was 9 months to 12 months from when I first realized, when I first realized that I may not believe this God thing, to when I was able to figure out that, I'm an atheist. Like, that took 9 months plus. So I don't know how long you've been working, and I've heard other people that it takes them, 3 or 4 years to go from their initial doubts to figuring out what to do with it. So don't rush yourself. You have time.
Yeah, I guess.
I know that it can be hard, especially when you're coping with depression too. I think it sounds to me like one of your issues is you've lost a very important and potentially effective coping mechanism, and you're still turning to it as a potentially effective coping mechanism, but it's not as effective now, even though you're continuing to turn to it, and you haven't been presented with an alternative that's effective. So it's still all you have to rely on. So
exactly, because I know that God does not exist, but I said that I'm a theist because, when I get depressed, there's a part of me that's like, hey, maybe you still are.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely understand that. Now, this is going to be advice that I'm giving you irrespective of where you end up landing on your ultimate belief. If you do decide to retain a belief in God, or if you do decide to leave a belief in God, I think that this is going to be something that you should really consider. If you are turning to that God belief as a safe place or a way to abate depressive thoughts, when you have anxieties or doubts, efficacious though they may or may not be, that threatens that as a solution for your current depressive issues. So what I would encourage you to do, even before you maybe even come to an ultimate decision, is start to examine other management solutions for depressive episodes that don't involve at all you turning to the belief in God, so that you can work on introspective management and get that sorted out for yourself, and that'll help to abate some of the anxiety and some of the depression and teach you some new coping mechanisms that you can take with you no matter where you land. So I think that's probably the most important thing that I want for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you. I love both of your channels. I'll be honest, watching a lot of your videos. No offense, Shannon, but more Paul's.
I don't blame you. He's better than me.
No, but I watched a lot more of Paul's and Jimmy's videos. I'm so sorry. I do watch some of yours though. Have really helped open. But it's helped open my brain and to like realize the delusion and that I've been brought up to believe. And so I do have to thank you guys a lot for that.
You're very welcome, and we're so thankful that in any way we've been able to help, and I hope that you find your way safe and find your way out of a maze and find your way to be intellectually and emotionally true to yourself.
We are going to let you go, Ziva. I just want to say thank you so much for calling and good luck.
Absolutely.
Okay? Have a good rest of your night, bud. See you later.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Bye. All right. So we're going to go we'll go to Mark the Theist in Memphis. Mark, can you hear us? Hello, Mark. Mark is a
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, and would like to talk to us about justice in the world. So, Mark, welcome to the line. And what would you like to talk about today?
I'm just kind of curious about justice and what the atheist take is on justice in the world.
Take is on justice. Well, that's a pretty big question there, Mark. Do you think that atheists see justice differently than theists do? Do you think the concept of justice is defined differently for atheists as it is for theists?
Well, maybe I apologize. Maybe I should have asked my question in a different way. Because I'm gonna assume that you guys are going to agree with me that justice ultimately isn't going to be served in this lifetime. So, I'm assuming you're going to agree with me on that. So,
by that,
how do we deal with this?
What do you mean?
Hello? I'm here.
Paul's trying to talk. It sounds like there's somebody blowing directly into your phone, so it's difficult to figure out when to speak. So go ahead, Paul.
So Mark, okay, I think what you're trying to say is that are you I guess saying, Mark, that if some form of evening out or retribution or revenge or whatever doesn't happen in this world before someone dies, that I'm assuming you're saying that you feel good because you think that in there's a next life where or perhaps I don't know what your theistic thoughts are, that either they'll come back to this life and experience some retribution, or that there will be a judgment day. Are you a Christian, Mark?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So I guess so my personal take, and I can't speak for all atheists by any stretch of the imagination, is that I can't decide what is true based on what I would like to be true. So I understand the emotional drive to say, you know what, there was someone who committed a horrible crime, and perhaps they died before they were able to be, to face the victims, or in any sense that there, sometimes. Or perhaps the reverse, that someone gets away with some crime or some slight and is never discovered or never has to face the consequences. The fact that perhaps viscerally I may wish that there was some more fairness in the world doesn't in any way affect the reality of the world. So I have come to merely accept that that there won't be a full slate of even-handed justice at all in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But further to that, I actually think Christianity is a hindrance. The Christian theology that I accepted, at least, I know everyone is slightly different, prevents some of that justice. So, for example, when a murderer accepts Christ 5 minutes before his execution, or is next to the cross with Jesus, that person never actually faces any ultimate retribution for his crime. That there is a get out of jail free card that is available to Christians that actually prevents what we might consider to be actual justice. So in my mind, the Christian gift actually hurts the problem. So those are two separate thoughts. So one is that I accept that I'm merely, it's just the reality for me that life isn't fair. There are people who live in other countries than I do, who just by being born there have a much less advantageous shake at life than I have living in Canada. That's not fair. That's not justice. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure about someone on their deathbed or whatever, 5 minutes, or a murderer. And I don't know if that would be a hindrance to Christianity. But the interesting thing about what you said was whatever we think, you, me, Shannon, whomever it may be, it would seem like to me it would be ultimately kind of irrelevant. Because, see, the fact of the matter is that whatever we think justice is still not going to be served in this lifetime. Okay?
For some people,
and
no.
so that's a problem. I mean, that's a problem.
Why is that a problem?
I mean, first of all, huh?
Why is that a problem?
Why? Well, I mean, why do we live in a world where justice isn't going to be served?
Why did God create a world where we need justice?
Well, I mean, if you're an atheist, I wouldn't be concerned about why God did this or did that.
If you're a Christian, I would be.
Because, but I'm not really concerned about that.
You're not concerned about why we need justice?
I'm just kind of... No,
I don't think
I'm
that we...
concerned about the fact that...
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, all I'm trying to get at is the fact that what is the atheist position on the fact that justice is not going to be served? See, when you say that it's just not, when you say that it's just not going to be served, then why complain when we see injustice in general?
Well, I think that it doesn't take an absolute standard. So, for example, for us to want things to be better, we can all imagine ways that everything, even our best day, we can imagine a way that it could be better, and want to strive for that to be better. On our worst days, it's very obvious many ways things could be better. I'm sure that anyone on a respirator can imagine, boy, it sure would be better if I didn't need this respirator. So in terms of why strive to be better, I think that doesn't need any kind of absolute external justification. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
And also, just because I'm not going to win every race I run doesn't mean that I shouldn't run any races. Essentially, what it sounds to me like you're saying is if there's not going to be justice 100% of the time in every single case being served, why should we care about justice at all?
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like a strange statement to make.
Right. I mean, it may have come off like that, and I'll have to listen to what I said. But, the respirator, I kind of lost you there for a second. But I'm not talking about, I'm sure you guys will agree with me that the court system has fallen, is broken in our society, which, of course, I think that presupposes Christianity, just the fact that it's broken and fallen.
Oh, because broken and fallen.
Just a part.
Okay, gotcha.
Well, that's actually what I was attempting to address. Like, there doesn't need to be a perfect standard for a person to imagine ways things can be better. It doesn't presuppose Christianity or that we are somehow worse than we used to be to imagine a way things can be better. So, can you follow me on that?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm imagining that, but we still have to go back to the issue, though. And that is, justice isn't going to be served.
Not in 100% of cases.
Now the question is,
you're saying justice isn't going to be served, but when you say justice isn't going to be served, you don't mean justice is ever going to be served ever. When looking, from just us being finite and there not being any God from that perspective. You're not saying it's never, ever, ever going to be served. You're just saying it's not fair that it's not going to be served in 100% of the cases in the way that I feel like it should be. Yeah?
Well, no, it's not an issue of the way I feel. It's the issue, I'll just give you guys an example. If someone experienced injustice, 600 years ago.
Okay.
So where's the justice for that right now?
If somebody experienced an injustice 600 years ago and the person that was bad to them didn't get punished, there's still no justice for it. Right. So that's essentially the same thing I'm saying. That doesn't mean that no one's ever had justice served. This is an important question, I think, and I think that we glossed over it and it needs to be addressed right away. What does justice look like? When justice is served, how does one serve the justice?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What has got to exist in order for justice to be served?
I believe in a system where we work towards rehabilitation. I think that we focus too heavily on justice being equivalent to retribution. And I think one of the reasons that we do focus heavily on justice being equivalent to retribution is because we look at it through a Judeo-Christian perspective where justice is retribution. And that is not necessarily what justice is, because we stop taking into account the fact that people make mistakes, people can improve, and people can get better. All of us have made mistakes. All of us have improved to a certain degree, and all of us most of us, 99.9% of us, are capable of getting better. So if we look at rehabilitation, I think that's better for society overall. And I don't think that justice is always retribution. If you think that justice is an eye for an eye, then I think that we also have very different concepts of justice.
Right. Well, that's fine, because obviously we're going to have different concepts because you're an atheist and I'm a theist. But I still think that it's just still going to be a problem.
I think it's because I'm a human.
Justice.
I don't think that my perspective on justice has a lot to do.
You may be a human, and of course I'm a human, but Shannon, it sounded when you said earlier that all of us have made mistakes and this and that and that. You're not saying that you're a sinner, are you?
No, I'm saying that we've made mistakes. And if you want to conflate that with sin in order to present an argument to me that I'm a sinner and thus I already believe in God, that's probably not going to work on me. I'd ask you a question that I asked earlier on Taki, that actually, if what your idea is of justice, that somebody needs to have an eye for an eye, or there needs to be some sort of retribution that's enacted upon them, otherwise they get away with it and that's unfair, then I would ask you why somebody can recant, for example, or ask for forgiveness and be forgiven even if their victim themselves doesn't forgive them. And if God forgives them, they get to go to heaven. Whereas somebody like me, for example, who has not done anything to anybody and works as hard as I can to do as much good as I can for society, when a God finally is apparent to me, based on your perspective, it'll be after this finite existence, and God will no longer allow me at that point to even have the forgiveness that he's offering me now. So why would God rescind the offer to forgive me and then punish me forever simply for not believing in him, and let a murderer go to heaven simply for making the choice to believe in him? How does that equate to justice?
Well, I've heard atheists talk about, what you just said about the murderer and stuff like that. And I'm not sure how often that happens.
What happened in
that murderer? They have died. Do you know how many murderers are in jail going, I believe in God now? All freaking heckin' kinds of them.
Okay. Well, and if they do, I mean, they're still going to have to answer for their crime. And so on and so forth.
Based on what passage from the Bible or theological perspective are they going to have to answer for their crimes after they die?
Well, I mean, I don't have my Bible on me right now, but it's still.
But you just made an assertion. If you're going to make an assertion, you should be able to back it up in a conversation where you're attempting to present that I don't have this, that you have potentially a better concept of justice.
And Jesus said to the thief on the cross, "Today you'll be with me in paradise."
So your concept, Shannon, of justice is if a 50-year-old man fondles a 3-year-old child, and that man's never caught in this lifetime, and that man dies, he just dies and gets away with it.
Yeah, and justice was never served in that situation. My concept of that's not a concept of justice. That justice wasn't served in that situation. My concept of justice.
No, I mean, okay.
Has nothing. So that means that justice was not. What happens in that case is that asshole got away with it. Justice was never served. But it may make you feel more comfortable to think that God will dole out justice, but that doesn't mean that it is happening. It just means that that's a warm, comfortable thing for you to think. And if you are trying or attempting in any conceivable way to tell me that somehow your system of belief is better because pedophiles who aren't caught now get punished, and thus what I believe is ridiculous, and I don't have a concept of justice, then we are going to have a problem.
Well, I'm not saying that you don't have a concept of justice.
Okay.
Now, if it came off like that, I apologize. What I am saying is what eventually happens is justice isn't served. And for you to say the asshole gets off doesn't tell us a lot.
It tells us that we should maybe be better at identifying pedophiles, be better as a society of identifying pedophilic behavior so that we can rehabilitate those people, give them treatment, and teach them how to be different. And instead of, letting them off, for example, we should monitor our children better. And instead of just focusing on what retribution we can do when these types of things happen, and the fact that periodically people will get away with in heinous acts, we should, instead of focusing on what retribution we should enact when these things do happen, we should instead put our focus on how to prevent these types of things from happening. And the best way to do that is to identify what we are as humans, how we act as humans, remove stigmas surrounding justice and actions about and crimes, so that people aren't marked with a scarlet letter for the rest of their lives, and allow people to be human so that we can work at better systems than we currently have.
Right.
Are you making an argument that I would like there to be fairness, therefore God? Is that what you called into? Like, we wish things would be fair.
I'm just asking about justice. That's all I'm asking about.
Okay, well, I think the answer is
what Shannon
many times
what Shannon said is only served. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think our position would be just the stone reality of the world. Many times, justice isn't served. And that's just the reality. That's just reality. And me wishing that it was different doesn't make it different.
So we kind of live in an implicit fallen world.
Well, fallen would imply that things were at one point better, and I don't agree that they were ever better.
We live in a reality where humans exist and act like humans and sometimes do crappy things, and sometimes we catch them and sometimes we don't.
Right. And if we don't catch them, they get away with it.
That is correct.
Because
they're currently getting away with it. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Because
also,
what
people
we
do
have to
great
ask
things and they're not rewarded.
Do I know?
There's beautiful people who deserve much better lots in life than they have, and they're not better. There are people who are born into situations that are terrible, and there are people who are born into situations that are very helpful, and that's not fair. That's not justice.
That's right.
But yet, that's the way life is.
Right.
Yeah. And that,
so, Mark, you were about to make a point.
And that presupposes Christianity and the fall of man. And I know, Shannon, you like that. That's why I say it. But because at the end of the day, we have to still ask ourselves.
Oh, my gracious. When you presuppose Christianity, everything presupposes Christianity because you already presupposed Christianity. My cat presupposes Christianity.
At the end of, because let me ask you this then. If things are like what you guys are talking about and, crappy world and this and that and that, what does that presuppose? That somehow does everything fall apart? Human beings are self-centered and immoral and
this is what we're saying. There is no evidence. Mark, there's no evidence the world was once perfect and that we are getting worse. There's literally no evidence for that.
There's no evidence that human beings are not getting worse.
That things were once perfect, and now things are getting worse. Like, that's just not the way life goes. We are living longer. We are living healthier. I know we see in the news because we have social media and we have TV. We have all these things that we are now seeing these atrocities. But the world is getting better. The world is not getting worse.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can say that the world is getting better, but that doesn't tell us a lot about human beings are improving. Because, it may be true in some cases.
What would improvement look like?
Selfish human beings. Because how human beings are selfish.
What would improvement look like?
For people to be able to change.
Okay, you don't think that there's evidence that people change?
Well, it depends on what you mean. Is it possible for people to change for the better and for it to be real without being selfish and doing things for personal gain? That's going to be kind of touchy.
Is that your only definition of improvement of society? Is that people no longer demonstrate any sort of selfish activities or inclinations?
Well, I would have to look more into it, but I didn't mean to use the word improve to have that word. But you
said that there's you said that there's no evidence that the world is improving, but you can't give me the quantification by which you would make that assertion. So you said there's no evidence that the world is improving, and I said, what would improvement look like? And you said people changing, and I pushed you on it a little bit, and you got to the point where you were like, well, we can't even necessarily use that. So you said there's no evidence that the world is improving or the people are improving, but you can't tell me what improvement would look like. So we have no metric to measure against, even by your own standards.
Right. Well, it depends on what are you talking about improving, because I didn't bring that up. I forgot what is the fellow's name?
Paul.
I'm sorry. Okay, Paul. He's the one that brought that up. So I was just going on what he said. If he, so.
Well, you said
improving. What does improving mean? Does that mean free health care for everybody? Is that the way things would improve? I don't know. Yeah.
Mark, you were talking about presuppositions. You were saying that the only way the only thing that we can make things better, make things more just, make things more fair, is if we are presupposing some perfection and that we've slipped from that. And I just keep trying to give you examples. If I had $1,000, I can imagine that I had $1,001, and that would be better. Right. That doesn't mean that there was a perfect amount of money. We can choose to better ourselves without presupposing perfection.
Right.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that, I wasn't saying presupposing Christianity or God, then therefore if we do that, then things will get better or improve. What I'm saying is what has got to exist. And so what I'm saying is what has got to exist in order for the secrets of men to be judged.
In order for the what of men to be judged?
The secrets of men to be judged. What has got to exist in order for the secrets of men to be judged?
Well, I don't think the secrets of men will ever be judged.
Yeah, I don't think that's a necessity or a well, it's not possible, I don't think, from my perspective. Like you keep coming back, I think, to I don't like it if people can get away with stuff. And if I believe in God, then people can't get away with stuff because he'll get them. So there. that's what the argument seems to be.
But Shannon, that's not what I'm getting at. I'm not saying, God's going to get you and I want this and that. It's the fact that the world we live in, this is the way it is. And the atheist response is, well, it's just not going to be served.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
and your response is, I don't like that. So how?
No, it's not an issue. It's not an issue that I don't like it. It's the issue that in your worldview, okay, in your ideology, this is what
get
happens.
Away with shit. Right.
Is that correct?
And if our ideology is, yep. That we can't control every aspect of reality is not news to a lot of us, and that sometimes people are going to do bad things and we won't catch them is like this is a carrots and sticks thing to me. You're saying, well, I guess you just have to face the fact that sometimes bad people are just going to live their whole lives being crappy and they're just going to die and they've been crappy and no one even knew. And that is, we have to accept that as a point of reality, the same way that we have to accept natural disasters happening as part of reality. Sometimes bad things are going to happen and justice won't be served. And that's just reality. And I don't even understand how that's a gotcha. I mean, do I wish that we could always catch everybody all the time and rehabilitate them? Sure.
Yeah, I'm not.
Wanting it to be so doesn't mean that it makes it so.
And I'm not even trying to do the gotcha, but see, we also have another problem, is that what if justice is served in this lifetime, but it's not really ultimate justice? What if someone is actually caught for doing something heinous, and the judge happens to be, some just whatever type judge, and he sentences the criminal, to what most people would say is not a fair sentence.
Then we should look at reform of our justice system. An
innocent man is convicted and has to serve a sentence that he doesn't deserve. Happens all the time.
Yeah. You're just saying sometimes we don't do a good job of justice, and I'll go, yep, absolutely, sure. We should look at reform. We should analyze our systems. We don't always do a good job of justice. Our court systems, our police systems, our persecution systems, our legal systems. A lot of those things need some reform. Yep, I'll agree with you on that. But the fact that they don't exist in a perfect state is just our current reality. We can do better and be better, but.
And some of the worst things that we do to each other aren't even illegal.
True.
Sometimes, people mentally abuse each other. That's terrible. That's not illegal.
Right. Yup.
I'm sorry, Paul. Say that one more time. I don't want to lose you on something.
I just said a lot of the worst things that people do to each other aren't even necessarily illegal. You can psychologically damage your children as you raise them, depending on what's going on. There's all kinds of abuse that we give to each other that aren't even against the law. So, and some might even say, well, the laws are imperfect, and I bet I could predict some laws that you don't like, that allow things that you wish wouldn't happen.
And that really just goes back to living in a fallen world, doesn't it?
Oh, of course it does.
Much as we try to, Shannon, regardless of how we reform the court system, it'll never happen. It'll just never happen. We can try.
We accept that,
but it'll never happen.
Humans could live for trillions more years.
You don't have a choice because God doesn't exist, so there's no afterlife.
Yeah.
And so
right.
It's just an argument for consequence to me. Yeah, sure. Sometimes people are going to get away with stuff. We lose, you win. Sometimes people are going to get away with stuff.
I don't even think it's an issue of sometimes. I mean, it's going to happen. It's going to happen a lot because we're not just talking about the era that we live in. I mean, we're talking about also hundreds of years ago too. So,
yeah, Mark, so I think Shannon and I would concede 99% of the time.
You're beating a dead horse. Yeah, you're beating a dead horse, Mark. Yep. Our worldview includes aspects of unfairness being a component of reality. And that sucks. But if it is reality, then it is what it is. And your perception is that there's someone who's going to sort that out for you. And we don't have that. So you see it as better, whether it is or isn't true, because you can say, well, at least he's going to get him. But we didn't even get into the concept of what God's justice would look like. And now we have to let you go because there's another caller on the line waiting. But I would love it if you called back again, Mark. Maybe when I'm not so tired. I have to apologize. I was a little bit ornery. So I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. All right. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Mark.
I appreciate it. I appreciate a spirited conversation, Mark. Have a good rest of your day.
All right.
See you later. Bye.
All right, you too. Bye.
I got saucy. I need to control my cadence. Sorry. I'm getting tired. Okay, so then we're going to talk to Jimmy from Texas. And I think Jimmy's probably going to end up being our last caller. So Jimmy, hi. We would like to have a chat with you about apparently the neurological aspects of religion. How you doing today, Jimmy? Welcome to the line.
Sure.
Jimmy.
Yes.
There you are, Jimmy.
I've called in a few times to PhD experience, talk healing, Truth Wanted. I've brought up the neuroscience of religion a few times. I don't know if you're familiar at all with the studies going on in Johns Hopkins involving psilocybin and what neuroscientists refer to as mystical experience.
Okay.
You've never heard of that research?
What neuroscientists refer to as mythical experiences. I've read some research on mythical experiences. Yeah, it's been a while though. I said mystical experience, not mythical. It's a term that was originally laid down by William James. Yeah, I don't know who William James is, but I just misspoke. Yes. Yeah. But I'm not super familiar with it. It's just something I've read on. I haven't read on it recently, and it's not anything that I took to memory. But sure. So where are we going?
Well, sure. Well, the research happening at Johns Hopkins, they're claiming that with psilocybin at high dose, they can induce what they refer to as a mystical experience. The term originally laid down by William James, and it's been refined since then. So we're talking about decades worth of established scientific research that's all been peer-reviewed and published in various journals that have been respected throughout the history that people have been studying this phenomenon in consciousness. And so I know in the earlier studies they used to study the Carmelite nuns in contemplation or the Tibetan monks in meditation. And what they found is that they can induce with a single high dose experiences that look virtually identical to naturally occurring mystical experiences that have been reported throughout the ages by mystics and throughout all various faiths of different religions. In other words, what a Christian mystic may have referred to as the beatific vision or the Holy Spirit is one and the same with what a Buddhist may call nirvana, or a Sufi mystic may refer to as fana. Each of the major religions has a name to refer to the experience, and so they're claiming that they can induce these type of experiences in a living room-like setting in their volunteers with a single high dose of psilocybin. They're not making people eat mushrooms. They give them a single pill, but that single pill is the equivalent of eating what Terence McKenna called a heroic dose of psilocybin mushrooms. And so, yeah, I mean, I was just wondering if you heard of that research at all, because, in Scripture it says if you would direct experience of the divine or God comes about through a revelation in consciousness. So what they call Thuria, I don't know if you ever heard that term. That's a Theoria, or beatific vision, or the direct revelation of the Holy Spirit. They're comparing it to that phenomenon. And I don't know if you guys have ever attempted meditation or ever had a shamanic dose of a psychedelic.
Well, Jimmy, we're a show that like.
Too. I know Shannon has spoken to
so is there
Isaac Lind. I'm sorry,
is there
it's kind of hard to stop. There's like a delay.
Or therefore not God?
Well, they relate this to what they refer to as the perennial philosophy. So yes, it is. They do refer to it as divine or God, but it's not it's not the God that it's ordinarily conceived of as, the omniscient bearded entity in the sky, what atheists often parody as the sky daddy. It's a bit more sophisticated understanding of God that people return with when they have these types of experiences. They've even shown that in these studies, the atheists who volunteer, they're no longer able to identify with atheism after this event. And
I'm interested in reading that.
I know a lot of atheists have, like I think Matt Dillahunty talks about how a lot of people call into a show talking about DMT, and he's admitted that he's never done it, but he wants to try it so that he could shut the people up that claim it.
Well, why don't you listen to Sam Harris, because Sam Harris has tried all kinds of psychotropics, including psilocybin.
Oh yeah, no, I read Sam Harris. Even Sam Harris. I don't know if you're familiar. He actually recently did what Terence McKenna called a heroic dose, and he gave a description that he said if he was religious, he would have no other language to reach for but to call it the Holy Spirit. And yet, he's still identified with atheism. But I wonder if he has had what in the studies they refer to as a complete mystical experience. In order for a volunteer to have a complete mystical experience, they have to meet 6 criteria. And I wonder,
Jimmy,
we're going to stop you for a second, because right at this point in time, it's just kind of like soapboxing a little bit. So I'm not entirely certain. It sounds like you want to spend this time, instead of talking to us, just, telling us about the fact that psychotropic experiences somehow map onto experiences that are spiritual in some way, and that people equate them very strongly to God beliefs. And I'll follow you right there, because I believe that a lot of God beliefs, if not most God beliefs, are experiential in nature. So if you can elicit that experience, it's very likely that experiential nature would transmit to the eliciting of that experience, especially if the person isn't primed ahead of time, or is primed ahead of time to view it through that lens. So I can understand all of those things, but I don't understand where we're getting to. So you and Paul should believe in God.
Well, here's my point. I think the whole approach of like, especially on the atheist experience, is completely wrong in trying to ask people for evidence. Like, I think that's the complete wrong approach.
You need to be careful. I'm one of the hosts of the atheist experience. I'm their newest
that's
host.
why I want to tell you this. That's why I want to speak to you.
Okay.
In other words, you don't request from a theist, I need to see evidence. Evidence, if you read scripture, is sought for oneself. So the way people have approached it throughout history is they will follow some type of spiritual discipline, or they'll engage in some type of spiritual act that will invoke mystical experience. And I don't necessarily see atheists doing that. They just, in the show, they're just sitting there, asking theists, okay, call in, give us evidence. But that's not really how evidence works in a theological framework.
Well, then don't call in.
You don't just
Then don't call. So this is where I think we're deviating, because you're essentially saying my critique of the atheist experience is that they're saying, hey, theist, call in and give us evidence. And when theists call in and don't give them evidence, they're somehow at fault for not comporting their approach to account for the fact that people are going to not follow the instructions. Like, why most theists are calling, because there's an entire subset of theists who I think would probably rip their hair out listening to you right now, because they believe wholeheartedly that their faith is evidence-based. And when you say that faith is based in experience, me and you are right in line. Yeah, I think so. But if you're attempting to compel me to believe something, your experience isn't transmittable. So you saying people have experiences that led them to a belief in God, for sure. Like, rock on. That's neat for them, but that's not going to do it for me or anybody else. It's not going to be a compelling argument.
Yes, no.
And
that's
Jimmy,
what I'm trying to say. That you don't listen to, in other words, you don't ask someone about details about their experience. You have to engage it for yourself directly.
No, but here's what I hear.
Of course, I'm not going to.
What I hear
go ahead.
is,
I'm sorry.
You called in and pointed me to, I just was on Google Scholar and looked at the dozens of papers on this. You're telling me that you have a fully naturalistic explanation for the experiences that people are having, that you've called to give me ammunition that naturalism is a better explanation for what's going on than spiritualism. And then you said, but if you try it yourself, you will also be fooled, just like all these other people, into thinking that the pill you took was God.
That's not what I'm saying. No, I'm saying that what the research is claiming is that spirituality has never been anything other than a natural phenomenon. Throughout millennia, people have been engaging in these types of experiences.
Yeah. So a big agreement.
No, I know you.
Yeah.
I know you agree, but my point is that the evidence is the experience itself. Experience for yourself, and as long as you avoid that, you're avoiding the evidence.
So your critique is that we're not going out doing psilocybin? Because I got a fun fact for you. I've done some psilocybin. Still an atheist.
Well,
now where are we gonna go? I did it.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have tried psilocybin.
The sky looked like it was TV too. That was the cool thing. Like, I stared at the sky for hours because it looked like it was TV. I don't know how to describe that or translate it, but it looked like I was looking at a TV, and it mesmerized me. Do I think that means the sky was a TV? No, I don't really think the sky was a TV, and that I haven't been seeing it up until the point that I did the psilocybin. The same way, if I had a religious experience now doing it, I don't think that I would come out of it. Like, I think I'd be in the Sam Harris camp. So if your critique is that we're avoiding somehow approaching situations that would lead us to God, and that's our problem, that it seems like a silly critique to me, and also a presumptive one, because you have utterly no idea what either of us have done individually.
And I grew up, I grew up in a community that was entirely religious, that didn't have a drop of alcohol in it, let alone anything else. And I've experienced many religious experiences that were insanely, incredibly real, and I know that they were part of community affirmation and fatigue and fasting. Like, there are lots of ways to produce weird effects in your brain that you're agreeing with us are natural. So to make the
Well, what I wouldn't agree with, though, is that I don't think it's a weird effect. I think the neuroscience has a very deep understanding of this. They've been studying it for decades.
But when I say weird, I mean differing from your day-to-day sober
Sure, but I don't think people are like necessarily looking at the sky, seeing a TV, and then thinking it's actually a TV. I think that's a misconception. Like
I really did at the time. I totally thought it was
I mean,
TV.
if you were able to stand and do that, that's you probably had a recreational dose.
To be fair, I'm not 100% sure I was standing at the time. I may or may not have been.
At the height of this experience, they say that what happens is a non-duality. In other words, your
have you done it? Have you had this experience? Have you had the experience yourself?
That's the whole reason I feel passionate in talking about it is because I've done it.
Because you had a spiritual experience.
You will not be able to stand. In other words,
and if it was that compelling to you, you think that it would map on, and it must be compelling to other people as well. If they could only just experience what you experienced, then they would understand.
And have you heard of attribution error?
You don't necessarily have to take psychedelics. You can meditate. You can engage in asceticism. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I think it's just the delay kind of makes it hard.
Do you know what attribution error is, or can you describe to me what attribution error is?
Similar to maybe the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, where you're misattributing things to something.
Yeah, essentially, where you experience things, no one questions whether the experience was what you experienced. What we question and what they question in the atheist experience, and what you may come across in life is, okay, but how do you know that what you experienced was caused by the thing that you are now if you're saying that the full cause is the substance you're taking, I think we would probably agree. But if you're saying that the full cause involves a spiritual realm or some kind of supernatural realm.
Yes, well, what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily due to the psychedelic. The psychedelic is a catalyst. But what ends up happening is people report 6 characteristics. Some of these are very profound. Invariably, people will report the transcendence of space and time. They will have a perception that is, very different from how we experience time ordinarily. And, there's also, it's also permeated with infinite, unconditional love. And, when you see scripture, I really believe it was written as an afflatus, as divinely inspired from these type of experiences. And if there's any misattribution involved, I think people misconstrued scripture to think that there is an abstract anthropomorphic God that's out there, outside of space and time, instead of realizing it as a potential in oneself. That's
when I hear that,
trying to get at.
All I'm hearing is that we very clearly have the ability to physically augment the levels of neurotransmitters in people's head to elicit specific types of experiences on a consistent basis.
Sure, but I mean, that's the way, I believe that's a narrative from the outside. That's, it's very different from being inside.
That would be backed up by the physical evidence that you initially referenced. I would be willing to estimate.
I agree, but the neuroscience has shown that this has been going on for time immemorial, perhaps. I mean, we're talking about millennia.
Yeah, because our brains have been constituted almost identically in the substance, the chemical compounds that we're imbibing. Or inhaling haven't changed the way that they affect our neurochemistry. So as long as we've been able to record our experiences when taking these substances, they've remained consistent, which is further evidence to me that these substances have a consistent effect on a set of neurotransmitters that have an effectual experience, probably on the pons, very likely, the frontal and prefrontal cortexes, and very likely it sounds like probably like the hippocampus and a bit of the amygdala probably, and probably the occipital lobe pretty heavily if you're having visual experiences. So it sounds like you can track these pretty consistently over time for their effect, but the effect and how we can track it doesn't really matter if you've actually had the experience, because experiences are incredibly powerful enough that you're attempting to argue us into convincing us that your experience is one that we would share and that other people would share, and that we would come to a consistent conclusion similar to the one that you came to as a result of that experience, even though you acknowledge that it's consistent over time and reference studies that very likely show the regions of the brain that were effective and how they do so consistently.
And not only that, when someone else who experienced the same thing Sam Harris attributes it to something different, and your first thought is to say, well, he must not have experienced what I experienced, and yet you're saying it can be replicated over and over and over. So again, this sounds like attribution.
I would also point out that, psychedelics aren't necessary, so I mean, it's one thing to make an argument that, okay, the brain, we all have similar brains, therefore they're all going to react similar ways throughout, no matter where in time someone, in history where someone does this. Sure, you could put it that way. I think the researchers, actual professionals, they see it, a little bit more deeply than that. In other words, it may be a very feature of consciousness itself, that it may not just be restricted to human beings, but we don't know enough about, our brains.
Well, that would be posited in the discussion section of the paper. Like, I don't think that there's any neuroscientist worth their salt that would, since we can't thoroughly define what consciousness is, would deign to include in the conclusion section of their paper. I'd have to read it, that thus this is an integral component of consciousness. I think that would be in the discussion segment of the paper, and for further discussion research.
It is, but they do point
there's a reason it's in the discussion section and not the conclusion section. I mean, I know that I'm not an actual professional. But I've read a lot of
I think it's because, neuroscience is just scuffing their feet on learning about this phenomenon. We still haven't.
The discussion section is meant for, this might be an interesting thing to explore further. These are some of the things that we can maybe look at later, and some of the things that in other aspects of the field it might be interesting to look into. But people read the discussion sections of papers and they say, oh, this is part of the findings. But it's not. It's saying that the findings are generally, like, you look at the methodology section and the conclusions, and that's where the brunt of the findings outside of the abstract are going to be. And the abstract's usually just a catch-up. And that's where you're going to find the real meat of, okay, this is what we found. And usually they're a lot more conservative there because they need to be, and they could just really detail, we found X, Y, or Z based on, rejecting our null hypothesis, and these are the statistical analyses we used as a result. And then in the discussion section, they said, it would be interesting if we talk about this stuff. But people look at the discussion section and they go, they found this in a study. No, they didn't.
That said, if you can find a paper that tells me that the Bible was written because of drugs, I would like to see that paper.
I can send you some interesting research, man. One thing I wanted to say, since you're on, the atheist experience and stuff, maybe I would really find one episode to be interesting if Matt started it off with vaping about 70 milligrams of DMT, and that's how he started off the episode. I think everyone would watch. And then we'll wait to see what happens.
Is it even legal for him to do that? Why would he go on a public?
Well, I mean, it's not illegal in the U.S. He can, if he wanted to, he can go to Peru where it is legal and try it in the form of ayahuasca.
He can't even leave his yard.
But make sure that he drinks the full cup.
He can't even leave his yard right now. So it won't happen soon. Maybe one day we'll take the show on the road and we'll go to Peru and we'll all get hopped up and then talk to you guys about all of the fun things we're seeing. And we'll see if we come out of
definitely.
I mean, I'm in for that.
Yeah, because they do say that in the research that at the very height of this experience, what they call the complete mystical experience, it has nothing to do with the history of the individual. What people are describing is content which is universal to the experience in and of itself. So in a way, people all kind of see the same thing. It has nothing to do with the uniqueness or your personal history, your personal psyche, your personal subconscious.
Oh, that is a huge claim. That's a massive claim because everything that we perceive is through the lens of experience. Like if you even have a glancing familiarity with the concepts of Christianity, and just a tangential idea of what a religious experience may feel like, and you have a perceptual output due to a physiological augmentation through a neuropsychological agent being introduced to you, and I just said that last word wrong, then there's a great likelihood that type of priming taking place could inform how your brain organizes that perception. Now, your brain organizes perceptions based entirely off of, well, not entirely, but previous perceptual experiences, and also your understanding of how perceptual experiences are supposed to be interpreted. So if you're told that this is going to give you a spiritual experience, and you have a general idea of what a spiritual experience is supposed to be like, and then you have an experience, it stands to reason that your brain is going to go, oh, I'm going to have a spiritual experience. That's what this is. And then you relay it as a spiritual experience.
Well, even like Dr. Roland Griffiths, he'll say that these experiences are unbidden. People, even the atheists, they don't go in thinking like, well, I'm going to have a spiritual experience. I'm going to encounter God. But this is what ends up happening. They have
may
no
go
other
and not
open
to the idea of them having an actual spiritual experience. But when they're in an augmented state, how their brain interprets that experience could be based on priming cues. And many of the priming cues, it's like an atheist could go in, and despite the fact that everybody else, you cannot tell me in isolation that you found a group of atheists that have never heard of the concept of spiritual experiences and are going to take these drugs without any idea that anybody else who's ever taken them in the history of the time has done so for spiritual reasons and had a spiritual experience, and use them as a control group. Because it's just not possible.
Let's say that you do find a control
There's no way to remove the priming.
They may not reach. Hypothetically, you find a control group like that. They may not reach for religious or spiritual vocabulary, but they may say similarly, profound things like, "It felt as though I perceived in a higher dimension," or it was fourth dimensional, or. They will reach for very similar and just equally powerful metaphors to attempt to describe this experience.
Sure. I believe that they had powerful experiences. I don't think that those experiences were God. I think that many people attribute them to God and then feel very strongly about them. I think you might be one of them.
Well,
and
what do you mean by God? If you're saying that you don't think they're God, how are you defining God?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. It depends. Ubiquitously, I suppose. Well, you defined God differently potentially than another person who had the same who had a similar experience and came to a different God. I don't even understand how that's a gotcha, because my definition of God wouldn't matter to what your experience attribution was.
I wasn't necessarily trying to get you in a gotcha. I was trying to show you that if God is in your vocabulary, you're obviously using that term in a certain fashion. In other words, I think
deity.
When people have this experience, it's not as though they're convinced of a deity, of a bearded entity. They gain a much more sophisticated understanding of God that I would say is more panentheistic as opposed to pantheism. It's a huge misconception. In other words, they don't return with like, oh, I met some bearded entity. They gain a very different outlook on religion.
Okay, you said that earlier on. I understand that the conception of God isn't the Judeo-Christian, like, stereotypical conception, and that's not necessarily what I meant. I meant it ubiquitously in however they define God and relate it to the experience. We do have to let you go, though. I appreciate the call.
Sure.
I always enjoy talking about brain.
Thank you.
It was interesting, and I hope you have a very good night, Jimmy. Thank you very much. Bye.
You too. Thank you.
All right. So we are done for the evening. We had a couple other callers on the line. Other callers, I'm very sorry. We actually went over time tonight. Sorry, Paul, for keeping you. Those are some good calls, though. What'd you think? How you feel, Paul? How you doing? Shake it out.
Good.
Shake it out. Okay.
I'm still not. I still don't believe in God. So.
What do you mean by God?
Yeah, that's right.
Are you sure? We'll do some mushrooms later, and then we'll see what happens. All right. Well, no, we won't, guys. We won't. We're not even this year. It's just a joke. All right. Well, everybody who is here on all of the various channels, either on my channel, Shannon Q, or on Jimmy Snow, or hopefully on the line, thank you very much for tuning in. You should, if you are not already, you should subscribe to Paulogia, who's over on this side of me. He has a wonderful YouTube channel. He does very cool things, and you should go check him out. And if you are watching on Jimmy's channel or on the line and you are not already subscribed to me, that was a solid choice. I'm a nightmare. You really made the right decision there.
Subscribe.
Yeah, no, it's a bad idea. I'm an absolute nightmare. And everybody who is watching, I hope you enjoyed the calls, and I hope you had a great night. And as always, help elevate the discourse.